A visit this week by the US Vice President Joe Biden to Ukraine was one of mixed messages. So argues Leonid Bershidsky in a column for Bloomberg. Here on the press review, we'll see what the analyst has to say. He starts from a speech by Biden, which he gave to the Ukrainian parliament, which was described by Bershidsky as rousing in its call for Ukrainian MPs not to waste an historic moment to change their country. But behind closed doors, says Bershidsky, the signals were different. He writes, the speech, however, followed a series of meetings in which the Vice President, Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, and US Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt pushed a cautious line: keep the much-maligned Ukrainian government in place and stick to the Minsk agreement with Russia to end the war in the east. The message: apparently the US wants Ukraine to make as little trouble as possible. So Biden apparently does not want Ukraine to rock the boat. The US Vice President met a group of young legislators and civic activists who asked him to push for changes to improve Ukraine's corrupt government system. Bershidsky quotes one legislator at the meeting who wrote afterwards on her Facebook page, "It is obvious that our American partners don't see a way to ensure stability without preserving the status quo. The Vice President's visit is meant to preserve the ruling coalition." Bershidsky argues that the US wants to keep Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk in office, even though his party is now highly unpopular, and there are many within the government apparently plotting his downfall. Bershidsky writes, although Yatsenyuk's political party is so unpopular that it wouldn't get into parliament if an election were held this week, it's an important part of the coalition. And if the Prime Minister loses his job, there is likely to be a snap election. The US administration clearly doesn't want such turmoil. It wants the current parliament to pass laws making it possible to hold elections in areas held by pro-Russian rebels. Ultimately, Bershidsky is dismissive of Biden's visit and argues that the US official's words were largely rhetorical, with little or no substance to back them up. He says in his speech to Parliament, Biden decried the cancer of corruption that's keeping Ukraine from becoming a successful democracy. In practical terms, however, his stability message means the preservation of a corrupt system of checks and balances in which cronies of the president and prime minister divide up access to the still ample opportunities to milk the hapless country dry. Our commentator today, then, is rather pessimistic towards both Ukraine and the US. America, by this reckoning, is not, at least at the moment, really committed to change in Ukraine because the status quo suits its interests. The same can be said for the current Ukrainian government. And whilst this may bring a certain amount of stability to the country, the absence of reform, at least for Bershidsky, represents a bad result for the country as a whole. That's all we have time for today. Join us again tomorrow for another press review. In Kiev, this is Ukraine Today.